Hi, and welcome to a special edition of Time to Read with Mr. Barry, which is actually not really a reading time at all. This is something we're going to do on Fridays at our house. It might not be a Friday at all. It might not even be close when you're watching this video, but we're going to call this time Friday Features, and it's going to be something extra that we'll do once a week just to share a little something. So it could be things like book collection, like you see here. It could be something with our Legos that we have at home. I was thinking about talking about how we collect books. I was thinking about chess or some other ideas, but we'll think of something interesting every Friday to do just to add a little fun and give everyone something to look forward to. And you might be really interested. You might think, maybe not so much, but hopefully you'll get something out of these little extra Friday features that we're going to share with you. So you might be wondering about this pile of books, and the first thing I want to ask you is, what is a collection? Because this is obviously a collection of some kind. I think collections are a great thing, and it's something that we put together and we hold on to because they're special to us. And you might collect Pokemon cards, you might collect Beyblades, you might collect dolls, you might collect toys or Legos or books or movies or anything, I don't know. But collections are a special thing, and everybody seems to or tends to have something special that they like to collect. My kids have a coin collection that they go back to sometimes, and a lot of other things. But I collect books, and I collect several different types of books, but one of my favorite authors is Roald Dahl, and I thought I would share my Roald Dahl book collection with you guys today. And I think as we look through these books, you might ask yourself a couple of questions. Have you ever read any of the books that you're seeing today? Are there any that you would want to read, or that you've heard of, or that you've seen around? But maybe take this time to go, ooh, I didn't know about that one, or I forgot about that one, but I would like to read that, and maybe get some ideas for some future reading. And I'm going to show you some children's books. I'm going to show you some other unique books, and we'll just kind of see some different things. Roald Dahl died in the early 1990s, and most of my books, all of my copies were published before he passed away. So these are all a little bit older, and I'll share another time about how I like to collect older books, because that is a big part of my hobby. And I'll show you another time why, because I really do think older books are special. They're made really well. They last a really long time. And so we'll get into that another time. But for now, let's go through first the children's stack, because not all of his books were for children. You might not have known that. All right. I hope you recognize this one. This is Matilda. This is one of my favorites, and one of his main illustrators was Quentin Blake. So see if you notice his drawings coming up often through this pile. It's not every time, but it's often. So we've got Matilda. We've got the BFG, which is a story that actually came out of another story. There's another Roald Dahl novel where he mentions the idea of a giant, and then a long time later, 10 years later, if not more, he decided to make up a story about that idea and turn it into another book. So the BFG, the Big Friendly Giant. We've got a spooky one called The Witches, and again, we can tell that those are Quentin Blake's kind of scribbly illustrations. The Witches is a lot of fun. We like that story. Here's kind of a rare one. It's called The Vicar, which is another word for a preacher. The Vicar of Nibbleswick, and it is about a preacher that has a special kind of dyslexia. And Roald Dahl actually wrote this story and gave all the money that he made from it to a dyslexia foundation to help them with education for students with dyslexia. This is a neat one. It's not very long. You can see it's really short. This is my favorite Roald Dahl book, and it is called Danny, the Champion of the World. And it didn't get a lot of attention. It was published in 1975, I believe, and it was sort of right after he'd written some other really famous books, and it just didn't get the same fame that the others did. But when I found this book 3 or 4 years ago, I realized it was definitely my favorite. And this is the one where he talks about the BFG and then writes that story many years later. So that's a very good story. We've got two that sort of go together. This is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. And sometimes people don't know that there's two of these. Sometimes they don't know that there's even one, but there's actually a second Charlie story. So if you liked Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, look for Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. And we've got pre-Quentin Blake. This is before he met Quentin Blake. Quentin Blake later went back and re-illustrated these books. He re-illustrated Danny as well, just to make it kind of match the other books, but these are before he knew him. Here is a famous short one called SEO Trot. If anyone from Miss Richards' class from last year is watching these videos, so you'd be in 4th grade now, you would remember I read this to your class and we had a lot of fun reading this story. This is a great short one. And he wrote a lot of these books that are 30 or 40 minutes long to read. A little bit shorter than a chapter book, but a little bit longer than a picture book, and this is one of those. This is another one of my very, very favorites called The Fantastic Mr. Fox. And they made this into a movie, and they made a lot of his books into movies, but this is a fun movie as well. And this is up there in probably in my top 3 favorite Roald Dahl books. Okay, we'll keep the list going. James and the Giant Peach, and I will tell you that this is my most special Roald Dahl book. Not necessarily my favorite story, but my most special. I bought this book at a very, very low price, and then I found out when I got it that it was something special. A true first edition, first printing, which I'll mention another time in another Friday feature, but it is a very rare book and it is very special. And somebody asked me when I found out how rare it was, they said, "Are you gonna sell it?" And I said, "No way, I'm gonna keep this book forever." Okay, a few big ones here. This is a fun short one called The Enormous Crocodile. And you can see most of my books are hardback books, the ones I've shown you. This one I don't have in hardback yet, so I'm gonna get it eventually, but this is The Enormous Crocodile. This is a book of poetry, very silly poems that Roald Dahl wrote called Dirty Beasts, and they're just short poems, and that's a fun short one. This is kind of a different type of story. It's not really a funny story. It's kind of a mysterious story called The Min Pins, about these little creatures that live up in trees. And I said that Fantastic Mr. Fox and Danny were my top 2, and my other in the top 3 is The Giraffe and the Pelly and Me. And if you've ever seen this before, you've probably seen it made small like a chapter book, but when it was first published, they made it huge, and they did these giant, colorful illustrations, and this is the first version that they made of this book. It's really neat and special. So that is most of my stack of Roald Dahl children's books. There's a few more that I'm going to collect eventually, but these are the main ones that I've got. But what a lot of people don't know is that Roald Dahl, for many years before he started writing children's books, he wrote adult books as well. So I'm going to show a few of those, and then we're going to finish up. If you look right here, we have 2 with the same title. This one's called Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life. And he had a publisher in England, and he had a publisher in the United States. And I enjoyed this one so much that I ended up with both. So this is a book that's geared more towards adults, and kids probably wouldn't find it as interesting. This is one called The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. And these are 2 books, and these are kind of kid books, kind of adult books. One is called Boy, and one is called Going Solo, and they're both his life stories, and you can imagine which one came first and which one came second. And solo means by yourself. And so he called, whenever he left his parents' home and he moved out on his own, Going Solo. So these are 2 books of his life stories. And then just 2 more. Something he called Kiss Kiss, which is kind of an odd title, that came out in the 1940s or the 1950s. This is a very old book written for adults that I've collected. And then last, that I'll show you today, this is called Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories. And he didn't write this, but Roald Dahl was a huge fan of spooky stories. And he was kind of upset about it, though, because he said that he tried all his life to write one spooky story. And he actually wrote about that before he wrote The Witches. And he wrote The Witches toward the end of his life. But his goal was always to write a spooky story, and he said that he could never quite do it. But I think he did pull it off in the end. But before The Witches came out, he collected this collection of ghost stories. He read hundreds and hundreds of ghost stories from all over the world, and he put together the ones that he thought were the spookiest. And I've read this, and I think he was right. These are spooky, and that's why it was more in the adult pile. But these are my Roald Dahl books, and now they're all over here, and I'm all out. But you can see that I really love this author, and when I love an author, I try to collect them well. And like I said at the beginning of this feature, collections are fun, and they take a long time. These books took a long time to collect, but then they're so fun to share and show other people and go back to and enjoy. And it just gives you something to look forward to whenever you find a new one at any kind of place. For me, an old bookstore, or maybe on the internet somewhere. So I hope you enjoyed seeing some of my collection, and we'll think of something interesting and a little bit different for next Friday. And we'll see you guys real soon. Thanks for checking things out. Have a great weekend.